Imagine a teenager charging into a wall of shields while veteran generals hold their breath. Imagine a 20-year-old walking into a throne room still warm with his father's blood and walking out king. Now imagine that same young man erasing borders from the Aegean to India in barely 13 years. Was Alexander the Great a liberator, a tyrant, or something far more dangerous? An idea that refuses to die? Tonight, we follow the footsteps of a prince who became a storm. We'll cross burning deserts, scale island walls rising out of the sea, stand in a temple where a whisper crowned a mortal as a god, and watch an empire collapse the moment its heartbeat stopped. Stay with me. By the end, you might decide that Alexander's greatest conquest wasn't land, it was memory. Macedonia in the 4th century BCE was a rugged land of mountains, rival clans, and warriors who measured loyalty with scars. To the south, the great city-states of Greece were busy fighting each other, convinced they were the center of civilization. To most of them, Macedonia was a backwater until one man changed everything. That man was Philip II, a king both ruthless and visionary. He reimagined war itself. His soldiers carried the sarissa, massive spears twice the length of any Greek hoplite's weapon. Packed into his new phalanx formation, they became an iron wall bristling with death. Philip didn't just conquer with steel, he conquered with diplomacy, marriages, and alliances, bending rivals into reluctant partners. Into this crucible, in 356 BCE, a boy was born in Pella, Alexander. His mother, Olympias, fiery and devout, told him he was no ordinary child. He was divine, destined for greatness. His father gave him ambition, but his education gave him vision. Sent to study under Aristotle, Alexander drank in philosophy, science, and the poetry of Homer. From the Iliad, he took a hero's model, Achilles, the warrior who lived short but immortal in memory. By his teens, Alexander wasn't just reading about heroes, he was acting like one. At 12, he put down a rebellion. At 18, at the Battle of Chaeronea, he led the cavalry charge that shattered the sacred band of Thebes, Greece's most feared warriors. In that moment, the world glimpsed a future where a Macedonian prince might be more than just his father's son. The year is 336 BCE. In a dazzling ceremony, King Philip II of Macedonia is struck down by an assassin's blade. The court is thrown into chaos. Rivals whisper, generals hesitate, Greek city-states sense an opening. The throne is suddenly empty, and into that silence steps Alexander, just 20 years old. He doesn't waver. He moves with the precision of a man twice his age. Potential rivals, eliminated even within his own bloodline. Generals, secured with loyalty and rewards. Enemies inside Macedonia, crushed before their whispers become war. But the real test waits beyond Macedonia's borders. In Thebes, the proud city that once stood against his father, rebellion sparks. Alexander gives them a chance to surrender. They refuse. What happens next shocks the Greek world. Thebes is wiped from the map. 6,000 killed. Survivors sold into slavery. The once mighty city reduced to ashes. It is brutal, it is calculated, and it works. The rest of Greece bends the knee. Even Athens, heart of philosophy and resistance, chooses negotiation over destruction. Alexander proves something vital in those first months. He is not a child king, not a figurehead. He is a force of nature. He unites the Greek world not through inheritance, but through dominance. At Corinth, the city-states gather to form the Corinthian League. They elect Alexander as supreme commander, the hegemon of Greece. His mission? To avenge the old Persian invasion that once burned Athens and enslaved Greeks. A holy cause, a crusade, and the perfect excuse for the conquest he already dreamed of. Alexander knew one truth: dreams don't conquer empires, armies do. And his army would not just fight battles, it would rewrite how wars were fought. At its heart stood the Macedonian phalanx, 16 men deep, each gripping the sarissa, spears so long they looked like a forest of iron bristling toward the enemy. Together, they moved as one body, an unbreakable wall that pinned opponents in place. But Alexander understood something deeper. An army can't just hold, it must strike. For that, he forged his legendary Companion Cavalry, an elite force of horsemen drawn from noble families, trained to ride at his side. They weren't placed behind the lines, they were the tip of the spear. When the phalanx locked the enemy, Alexander and his companions would swing wide, crashing into exposed flanks with devastating precision. Around this deadly core, he built flexibility, archers and skirmishers to soften the enemy, engineers to build siege towers and bridges, and light infantry to fight where terrain broke the phalanx's order. But the true secret wasn't equipment, it was discipline. His men trained year-round, drilling until they could improvise under fire, adapting in chaos without waiting for orders. The army became less a collection of soldiers and more a single living machine, fast, lethal, and terrifyingly intelligent. By the time he looked east to Persia, Alexander commanded not just an army. He commanded a weapon designed to dismantle empires. Spring, 334 BCE. Alexander marches to the edge of the known world and crosses the Hellespont into Asia. Legend says he hurled a spear into the soil as he stepped onto the far shore, claiming the land not as a guest, but as its conqueror. For his men, it was more than ceremony. It was destiny in motion. Waiting for him at the river Granicus were the Persian satraps, their cavalry lined up along the banks. The river was swollen, the slopes steep, the enemy perfectly positioned. No sane commander would charge head-on across a raging current under a hail of arrows. But Alexander was no ordinary commander. He didn't hesitate. He led the Companion Cavalry into the torrent, water crashing against horse and man. Arrows darkened the sky, lances bristled on the far bank, yet he pressed on. The clash was chaos, screams, splashes, iron on iron, and then, with a wedge formation aimed straight at the Persian center, Alexander broke through. He cut down Persian nobles himself, wounds be damned. By sunset, the Persians were shattered. Asia Minor lay open, word spread like wildfire. The young Macedonian had crossed into Asia, and at his very first battle, humbled the defenders of the empire. The message was clear. This was no raid. This was the beginning of a storm that would not stop. 1 year later, 333 BCE, Alexander faces the Persian king himself, Darius III. The great king arrives with an army so vast it should have crushed the Macedonians by sheer weight of numbers. Yet Darius makes a fatal mistake. He chooses the battlefield poorly. At Issus, the plain is narrow, squeezed between mountains and the sea. Instead of overwhelming, the Persian host is strangled, packed so tightly that their numbers become a weakness. Alexander sees the flaw immediately. He anchors his phalanx in the center, holding the Persian push. Then, with the precision of a blade, he leads the Companion Cavalry in a lightning charge straight at Darius's position. Macedonian steel cuts through the royal guard. Dust and blood fill the air. And then, the unthinkable. Darius flees, the king of kings, abandoning not only his army, but his own family. His wife, mother, and children fall into Alexander's hands. Yet instead of humiliation, Alexander treats them with dignity and respect. To the world, it sends a chilling message. The Macedonian invader looks more like a king than the king himself. Issus is more than a victory. It is a humiliation for Persia. From that day forward, Darius is no longer seen as the hunter. He is the hunted. After Issus, Alexander pushes south along the coast. City after city bows before him, all but one, Tyre. Tyre is no ordinary city. It is the jewel of Phoenicia, a fortress rising from the sea itself, half a mile offshore, walls soaring 100 feet high. For centuries, it has defied conquerors. The Persians still hold its harbor, and as long as Tyre stands free, Persia's navy can fight on. Most generals would negotiate or march past. Alexander does neither. Instead, he decides to move the land itself. He orders a causeway built out into the sea, stone by stone, timber by timber, stretching toward the island. The Tyrians laugh at first, then they unleash fire ships and arrows, destroying the work. Alexander rebuilds, wider, stronger, armored with siege towers. Day by day, the earth creeps across the water. 7 months of brutal, grinding effort. Then, impact. Siege engines hammer the walls, towers roll forward, and Macedonian soldiers pour through the breaches. What follows is massacre. 8,000 Tyrians are killed, 2,000 crucified along the shore, and survivors sold into slavery. The message is unmistakable. No wall is too high, no sea too deep, no defiance too safe. Tyre believed the waves would shield it. Instead, it drowned in Alexander's will. And with Tyre's fall, the eastern Mediterranean is his. With Tyre destroyed and Persia's fleet crippled, Alexander turns south. His next prize, Egypt, ancient land of gods and pharaohs. But unlike Tyre, Egypt does not resist. For centuries it has lived under the heavy hand of Persian satraps. Now, when Alexander arrives, he is welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In Memphis, the priests crown him Pharaoh of Egypt, son of the gods, ruler of the two lands. The people cheer. For the first time, Alexander is more than a king from abroad. He is embraced as part of Egypt itself. He seizes the chance to leave a permanent mark. On the northern coast, where the Nile meets the sea, he draws lines in the sand that will become Alexandria, a city designed to outlast empires, with harbors for trade, streets for culture, and temples for learning. Centuries later, it will house the greatest library in the ancient world. But Alexander's ambitions reach even higher. Deep in the desert lies the Oracle of Siwa, the shrine of Ammon, older than memory and feared for its secrets. Few dare to cross the burning sands. Alexander leads the way. Through storms and thirst, he presses on until the temple finally rises from the dunes. Inside, the priests greet him not as a mortal king, but as a son of the god Ammon. What was said in those chambers remains hidden, but when Alexander emerges, he carries himself differently. He is no longer just Macedonian, not just Pharaoh. He is divine. A king can be challenged, a god cannot. And in that moment, Alexander understands the true power of belief. The year is 331 BCE. At last, Darius III gathers the full might of Persia. Over 200,000 troops, war chariots armed with scythes, cavalry from every corner of the empire. He chooses the battlefield carefully, Gaugamela, a vast, open plain cleared of obstacles, perfect for his chariots and overwhelming numbers. Facing him, Alexander commands perhaps 40,000 men, outnumbered 5-1. To most, the outcome seems certain, but numbers alone don't win wars. Position, timing, and will do. As dawn breaks, Alexander surveys the field with a predator's calm. He extends his right flank outward, further and further, luring Darius to stretch his lines in response. A gap opens in the Persian center, small at first, then widening. That is the moment Alexander has been waiting for. He wheels his companion cavalry into a wedge and drives straight into the breach, straight for Darius. The clash is thunderous. Shields buckle, lances snap, and for the second time, the King of Kings sees his guard collapse. Panic takes him. Darius flees once more, his chariot tearing through his own soldiers in desperation. With their king gone, the Persian center disintegrates. The Macedonian phalanx surges forward, pressing the rout into a massacre. Gaugamela is not just a victory, it is annihilation. In a single day, the backbone of the Persian Empire is broken. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, all the jewels of the East, open their gates without a fight. The world's greatest empire has fallen, and at its heart now stands Alexander. The Persian Empire lies shattered, but Alexander does not stop. He marches east, past deserts and mountains, into a land the Greeks know only from legend, India. Here the monsoon rains turn roads into rivers, fields into swamps. The men are weary, but Alexander presses on. At the river Hydaspes in 326 BCE, a new enemy awaits, King Porus, tall, proud, unflinching, and with him, a weapon the Macedonians have never seen before, war elephants. Dozens of towering beasts line the riverbank, armored and thundering, each carrying warriors on their backs. To Alexander's veterans, it is like facing monsters out of myth. Porus believes the swollen river will shield him. Alexander turns the river into a weapon of his own. One stormy night, under cover of rain and darkness, he secretly leads a force upriver, crosses unseen, and strikes at Porus's flank at dawn. The battle is chaos. Elephants charge, trampling men underfoot, tusks ripping through ranks. Horses panic at their smell. The Macedonian line bends, nearly breaks, but Alexander adapts, ordering his men to spread out, isolate the elephants, target them with javelins and arrows until the beasts turn wild, crushing friend and foe alike. At the center, Porus fights atop his elephant, refusing to yield even as blood runs in rivers. When finally captured and brought before Alexander, he is asked how he wishes to be treated. His answer, as a king. Alexander, impressed, replies, "You shall have everything a king deserves." Instead of destroying him, Alexander restores Porus to his throne, now as an ally. For the first time in the East, he shows that conquest can mean partnership, not annihilation. But soon, at the banks of the Hydaspes River, his soldiers refuse to march farther. They have followed him for 10 years, through deserts, storms, and endless battles. Now they lay down their spears, not in rebellion, but in exhausted silence. Alexander has never lost to an enemy, but here, at the edge of the known world, he loses to the limits of his own men. Alexander returns from India not as a triumphant general, but as a man changing before his soldiers' eyes. The boy they once drank with now dresses in Persian robes, sits on golden thrones, and demands proskynesis, the ritual of bowing before him. For Persians, it is tradition. For Macedonians, it feels like betrayal. To unite East and West, Alexander orders mass marriages between his officers and Persian noblewomen. He himself marries Roxana, a princess of Bactria. To him, it is strategy. To his men, it is another sign their king is slipping away from his Macedonian roots. Whispers grow in the camps, tension sharpens, and then, one night at a feast, it explodes. In a drunken argument, Alexander kills Clitus the Black, the friend who once saved his life at Granicus. The act shatters him with grief, but the bond of trust with his men cracks irreparably. Suspicion takes hold. Alexander begins executing officers accused of plotting. Fear replaces friendship. The king who once stood shoulder to shoulder with his soldiers now towers above them, distant, almost untouchable. His dream has grown too vast, roads connecting continents, a common currency, a blended army of Macedonians and Persians. But to the veterans who left home a decade ago, it feels less like a vision and more like the loss of everything familiar. Alexander is still conquering, but now he is fighting a new battle, the loyalty of his own people. The year is 323 BCE. Alexander returns to Babylon, the ancient crossroads of empires. Here, he is not sharpening swords, he is drafting blueprints, roads to knit continents together, a single currency to ease trade, harbors and canals to fuel commerce, and new Alexandrias to stand as beacons of learning from Egypt to India. It is no longer just conquest, it is vision. Alexander is building not only an empire of land, but of culture, knowledge, and exchange. For a moment, it seems he might succeed in creating a world without borders. And then, suddenly, he collapses. A fever grips him. At first, his generals assume exhaustion. After all, he has marched through deserts, jungles, and storms. But the heat does not break. Day after day, his strength fades, his voice weakens, his body withers. Rumors spread like wildfire, malaria, typhoid, poison. No one knows. Soldiers file past in silence, touching his hand, weeping as they say farewell to the man who led them to the ends of the earth. When asked who should inherit his empire, his answer is as chilling as it is vague. To the strongest. On the 11th day of fever, the heartbeat of the empire stops. Alexander is dead, just 32 years old, the world's greatest conqueror, undefeated in battle, brought low not by sword or spear, but by something unseen. Alexander is gone, but his empire, stretching from Greece to India, has no heir strong enough to claim it. His only son is unborn. His generals, once bound by loyalty, now see opportunity. The great Macedonian machine that once moved as one fractures overnight. Perdiccas is named regent, but his authority is paper-thin. Ptolemy steals Alexander's body, carrying it to Egypt to anchor his own claim. Others, Seleucus, Antigonus, Lysimachus, Cassander, scramble for their share. What begins as mourning turns into maneuvering. Soon maneuvering becomes war. The wars of the Diadochi, the successors, rage across the old empire. Assassinations, betrayals, shifting alliances, Macedonian fights. Macedonian, carving the map into pieces. After decades of chaos, a new order emerges. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia, the Antigonids in Macedon. No longer parts of one empire, but rival kingdoms, each wearing Alexander's shadow like a stolen crown. The empire he built with speed and brilliance could not survive his absence. Unity died with him. What remained was blood, ambition, and fragments. Though Alexander's political empire crumbled, something far greater endured, his cultural legacy. Everywhere his armies marched, they left behind not just garrisons, but ideas. Greek became the language of trade, law, and science from the Nile to the Hindu Kush. His cities, over 20 founded in his name, became crossroads of worlds, where Greek theaters stood beside Persian palaces and Eastern art blended with Western forms. The most famous, Alexandria in Egypt, grew into a lighthouse of knowledge. Its library would one day aim to gather all human wisdom under a single roof. Astronomers in Babylon refined Greek models of the heavens. Egyptian mathematicians exchanged ideas with scholars from Athens. Physicians, philosophers, and traders carried their discoveries along the roads Alexander had cut across the world. Rome, centuries later, would look to him as a model. Generals from Caesar to Napoleon studied his campaigns. Even modern war colleges still teach his maneuvers at Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, and Hydaspes, blueprints of how willpower and strategy can bend the fate of nations. The empire of land died quickly. The empire of culture, the Hellenistic world, lived on, reshaping civilization itself. History remembers Alexander as the Great, but greatness is never simple, never clean. He unified Greece, yet began with the annihilation of Thebes. He burned Persepolis, whether out of vengeance or drunken impulse. He crucified survivors at Tyre. He executed rivals, even friends like Clitus, in paranoia and rage. And yet, he also honored the family of Darius, treated captured queens with dignity, and respected kings like Porus enough to let them rule again. He envisioned not just conquest, but fusion, a world where Greeks and Persians, East and West, might live as one. So which Alexander do we see? The brilliant strategist who mastered every battlefield before age 30, or the ruthless tyrant who left rivers of blood behind him? Perhaps both. Because legends are contradictions wrapped in flesh. To some, he is a hero. To others, a warning. To all, he is unforgettable. For all the chronicles and monuments, 3 riddles about Alexander remain unsolved, echoes that keep his story alive. First, who killed Philip II, Alexander's father? Officially, it was a bodyguard named Pausanias. But was it personal vengeance or part of a deeper conspiracy? Some whisper Olympias knew more than she admitted. Without Philip's death, would Alexander have ever taken the throne? Second, what did the Oracle of Siwa truly say? Did the priest declare Alexander divine, son of Zeus Ammon? Or did a young king simply hear what he longed to believe? The sanctuary walls remained silent, leaving us only with a mystery that changed how he saw himself and how the world saw him. Third, what killed Alexander at Babylon? Fever, poison, or disease? Ancient accounts disagree. Symptoms blur, and no verdict satisfies. The mightiest general in history, undefeated on the battlefield, may have fallen not to an army, but to chance, betrayal, or nature itself. These questions are more than footnotes. They are the fuel of legend. For every time we ask them, Alexander rises again, not as fact, but as a living riddle, daring the ages to solve him. Here is what we know for certain. A boy from Macedonia took his father's weapon, his mother's fire, and his teacher's wisdom, and with them redrew the map of the known world. He never lost a battle. He never stopped reaching for more. He dreamed not only of ruling nations, but of uniting them under one vision. But greatness comes at a cost. For every city named Alexandria, another was burned to the ground. For every culture preserved, another was bent beneath his will. For every step toward unity, there were rivers of blood. So was Alexander a hero, a tyrant, or something in between? Maybe the answer lies not in choosing, but in admitting that he was both. a conqueror and a visionary, a destroyer and a builder, a man who became a myth. And myths do not fade. They echo. They force us to keep asking, what does it mean to be great? And what price are we willing to pay for it? If this journey through the rise and fall of Alexander stirred you, if it made you see both the brilliance and the shadow behind the name, the Great, then don't let the story end here. Hit like to keep the history alive. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was Alexander truly a hero, or just a tyrant cloaked in glory? And make sure to subscribe to History in Motion for more tales where fact meets mystery and the past moves before your eyes. I'm your host, and this has been History in Motion. The echoes of history are loud. Let's keep marching together